Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
I got my bags packed and on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. Looking real good in my passport photo.
Amateur Traveler, episode 137. Today, the Amateur Traveler goes to Valencia, Spain. Learn about the historic, the futuristic, and sometimes the fun of just setting things on fire. Today, on the Amateur Traveler.
Should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Before we get into the interview, I do have two news stories for you today. The first one is an update on Kenya, and you may recall we've reported on this show, as in many other places, on the unrest in Kenya. There has been a letter written by the U.S. ambassador this week. Ambassador Michael Renneberger wrote a letter to travelers and business people encouraging them that now is the time to come back to Kenya. In part, the letter said, "I urge you to look again at Kenya as an exciting destination for tourism and for doing business, be it trade or investment." In 2007, a record 102,000 Americans visited Kenya, many to enjoy the richness of the country's culture and the majesty of its landscapes and unparalleled wildlife. So something to keep in mind as you're considering any travel to Africa. The other story I have for you is a review of the 10 most comfortable airline economy seats. This is an article that is near and dear to my heart as someone who is 6'3" and doesn't necessarily enjoy long airline flights with my knees firmly entrenched in the seat pocket in front of me. So check this out and learn what airlines you might want to consider. Links to both of these articles in the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. I'd like to welcome to the show Heather, who's come to us from Bristol, England, and has come to talk to us about Valencia. Heather, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Chris. It's great to be here.
And Heather blogs about her travels at Heather on Her Travels, which we'll put a link in the show notes to. And you went to Valencia, which is in Spain. I know very little about Valencia. I know they have oranges. That's really about it. So what led you to Valencia?
Well, I was looking for a short break for the family, really, for me, my husband, and my three children, who are between 11 and 15 in age. And I have to say, at this time of year in the UK, the weather can be a bit dismal, a bit wet and dull. So I do like to get away to somewhere with a nice climate, which Valencia does have. Also, we can fly very easily to a lot of European destinations from Bristol on EasyJet, which is one of the low-cost carriers. So I was looking for cheap flights, and Valencia was pretty cheap. So it seemed like a pretty good place to go for a spring break.
So you just went here in April, as I recall.
Yeah, and the weather is really nice at that time of year. It's sort of between 20, 25 degrees. So it's pleasant, sunny most of the time, warm. So it's a great time to visit Valencia, actually, the springtime. Yeah, great.
Okay. Other than the fact that I'm a little depressed that you're talking about England weather because I'm flying there in a week, let's jump right into Valencia and talk about what were the highlights of your trip.
Oh gosh, there were so many. I mean, we were there for 4 full days, so we had perhaps more time than the average weekender might have to see some of the things, but even then, there was a lot more we could have seen. I think one of the highlights was meeting a Valencian called Angel, which is written Angel, but it's pronounced Angel. And he was someone that I met through Hospitality Club, which is a social networking site. So he took us around quite a lot of places and really introduced us to some things. It was just great to have a local view on the city. Apart from that, there are so many wonderful things in Valencia. I mean, it's right on the coast, so you've got the beach right there. You've got a wonderful complex, a modern complex called the City of Arts and Sciences, which has these amazing futuristic buildings, a concert hall, an IMAX cinema, those kind of things. But it's just incredible to look at.
Yeah, it definitely looks like a city out of the future there.
Yes, if you see the pictures, they're just amazing. I've heard it described as a parking lot for alien spacecraft or a graveyard of dinosaur bones. It was designed by a local architect called Santiago Calatrava, who builds a lot of these amazing public buildings, really incredible shapes, and they look completely different from whichever side you see them. And around them, they have these shallow pools of water. So if you like taking photographs as I do, it's just a dream to photograph.
Now, I want to pause here for a second and go back to something you mentioned. You mentioned the hospitality club, and I think we've only talked about hospitality clubs on Amateur Traveler once, and that briefly, and we haven't talked to somebody who's used one. Tell us a little more about what that is, because I'm not sure that everybody knows what you're talking about.
Yeah, sure. Well, what I'm talking about is a social networking site. In other words, a website that you can register your details on, and through it, you can meet other travelers. And you can offer to host people either with accommodation or just to meet them, show them around your home patch. And in turn, you can ask them to do the same. And the particular one that we were using is called Hospitality Club, and I can give you the link to that. There are others called Couch Surfing, that's another well-known one, but there are quite a lot of them now. So we used it to contact Angel. Before we went, I emailed him and he said he was happy to meet with us. And so that's what we did. A couple of times we met up, we did things together, and it was a great success. We didn't actually stay with him, but he was great help in showing us around and taking us to really nice restaurants, sort of places the locals go. So it was great from that point of view.
And so it's really just somebody who just enjoys meeting new people, who wants to show them around their city. It's a free service, and they're just doing it because they thought it would be fun. And so it's a real interesting peek into the local culture. So that's why I wanted you to go into a little more detail. That's really great.
Yeah, that's right. I think a lot of people are a little bit apprehensive of using them. A lot of people think of them as just being about a bed for the night.
Right. Couch surfing, for instance, focuses on that predominantly. Right.
And a lot of people might not want to have a stranger in their house, or they might be a bit apprehensive about meeting someone, particularly if you're traveling on your own. But it doesn't have to be about just accommodation. It can just be about meeting up for a drink, a chat, a meal, spend an evening together. And so that's what we did.
Excellent. And then I think I interrupted you. You were starting to talk about the Old Town.
Yeah, the old town in Valencia. I mean, there's so much going on there. There's some beautiful squares. There's the cathedral. There's the old quarter, which is called Barrio Carmen, which is lots of small streets, older buildings, but it's also the center of the nightlife in Valencia. So if you're there in the evening, sort of 9, 10 o'clock, that's where the nightclubs are. That's where everything is happening. And on the first night, we were staying in a backpackers hostel right bang in that center. And I have to say, we didn't get a lot of sleep that night. So another thing that was really great is the park called the Turia Gardens, which runs through Valencia. In fact, what it is the site of the old river. It's the old riverbed, but apparently due to flooding in the 50s, the river was diverted and that left this whole riverbed. And the city didn't really know what to do with it for a long time, but eventually they made it into a series of gardens and parks. And one thing I really enjoyed while we were there was going cycling through that, and you can cycle right the way along it from the city centre as far as the port and the beach, and that's what we did with Angel on our first day there.
Okay. The other thing that was very interesting in your pictures, and I would advise people to check out the wonderful pictures that Heather has here on her blog page. You were there during the Fallas Festival, or you went to the Fallas Museum?
Yes, we went to the museum. We were there in April, and the Fallas Festival, or the Fallas Festival, I should say.
Okay. That's right. Spanish, sorry.
Happens in March around the Feast of St. Joseph, and it's a whole pyrotechnical extravaganza where the whole city goes wild with fireworks, a lot of noise, parades through the street, and they make these amazing cardboard papier-mâché sculptures, which are like cartoons, like Disney cartoons, if you like, and they can be as high as the building, or some of them just a couple of meters high. And those are constructed in each neighborhood in the old town. And then at the end of the festival, they're all burnt. So the whole lot goes up in flames. And there are loads of bangers. I think these fireworks are mainly noise. Uh-huh. So we were there about a month afterwards. I heard a lot about it, and I've read a lot about it, and it sounds quite amazing. But we were only able to see the museum where some of these sculptures are saved. The best ones are saved each year. And so you can actually go and see some of the sculptures.
In terms of places to stay, you mentioned that the hostel didn't necessarily work out that well, but you only stayed there one night. Did you have other places that worked out better for you?
Yes, in fact, we always planned to stay in another hostel/hotel called Deluxe Rooms. It's part of the Home Group, and they have several hostels and hotels in Valencia. So the one we stayed in for most of the time, it was actually right beside the City of Arts and Sciences in a modern building. It was very nice, and the thing that attracted me to it in the first place was the fact that every room in this hotel is different, and they had asked local artists to design each one differently. So my husband and I were in one room, and the theme of that was Burma. So we're in this sort of Southeast Asian paradise in our hotel room, and my children next door were in Venice. So they had pictures of St. Mark's Square and gondoliers and everything on their walls. So they were sleeping in Venice that night, even though we were all in Valencia, really.
What kind of preparation did you do ahead of time? What did you use to prepare for the tour? You talked about using Angel as a resource, but did you do other planning with guidebooks or websites or?
Yes, I did, because being a blogger, obviously one of my interests in travel, and I think part of the pleasure of traveling for me is also the anticipation of going, the planning for it.
I understand completely.
I know not everyone's like this. Some people prefer to just be spontaneous and turn up and go with the flow, but I work a bit differently. You know, I'm the sort of sad person that has the guidebook by my bed for a couple of weeks before we go, and I'm researching it all. So when we go, my family get the benefit of all that, but I enjoy that because it just makes it more meaningful for me. So I did check out quite a few websites, had the guidebook, and read up quite a lot about Valencia.
And then I think you know the two questions I tend to ask. What did people recommend that you thought was a little disappointing? And then what did they leave out?
I don't think there was anything really that was very disappointing because it was all wonderful. The only thing I didn't really enjoy that I thought I would enjoy was this local drink called horchata, which is
Oh, yeah,
quite
yeah.
traditional to Valencia.
Uh-huh.
And it's a sweet, milky drink. It's a little bit like soya milk, but very sweet, made out of tiger nuts. And I do have a sweet tooth, and I do like hot chocolate and things like that. So I thought I would love it. But I think when we had it, it was just so sweet and so sickly. It just wasn't to my taste. So maybe that was a disappointment, but very minor, very minor. And you have to try these things, don't you?
Now, you said made out of tiger nuts. In Mexico, where I've had horchata, it's made out of rice. So it's a different recipe in Spain.
Yeah, I think it can be made out of different things. I've heard rice, tiger nuts, and other types of nuts, depending on where you are. Did you like it when you had it in
Well, I
South
do,
America?
but in Mexico, but yes, I enjoy horchata.
All right.
And then what did they leave out? What did you learn, for instance, through Angel that you didn't discover in the guidebooks or in the online resources?
I think one thing was that I began to realize when I was there, it came home to me that it's a city that is actually growing really fast.
Mm-hmm.
And it means that it has this combination of the new and the modern, which is epitomized by the City of Arts and Sciences complex, which is brand spanking new, futuristic. But when you're in the old town, you see these gaps in the building where obviously an old block has been brought down and they're building a new one, which is surrounded by hoardings with street art, which I happen to like, some amazing street art and pictures there. That was interesting to me because a lot of places you go, the old town is the place that is all perfectly preserved. You wouldn't imagine any building would be going on. You'd imagine that everything would be preserved, picturesque. And that wasn't quite the case in Valencia. The old town was very much living. People were really living their lives there. And it was developing all the time. And this was something that Angel said as well. I mean, when I asked him what he liked and what he didn't like about living in Valencia, he had to try really hard to find anything that he didn't like about living there because the climate's so fabulous, the food's so fabulous. But the only thing he did mention was that it's a city that's growing quite fast. And so sometimes it's busy, there's traffic, all that kind of thing. I think that was quite interesting.
And then you mentioned horchata. Tell us a little bit about your other experiences with food. You said the food was good in Valencia. What did you particularly like?
What was wonderful about the food and drink there, I think one of my favorite things was the Mercado Central, which is the main market in the center of Valencia. And it's pretty much a tourist attraction in itself, even though locals really do shop there. And you find the most amazing produce, the oranges of Valencia, and wonderful fruit and vegetables, but also all the cured meats, the jamon, the local cured ham that you find there in Spain, and wonderful fish and seafood. And that was just a feast for the eyes. So we did buy our picnic there one day, and that was wonderful. And when we were with Angel, he did give us recommendations for various restaurants, which we tried. So we did eat quite well with him as well.
I loved the pictures you had in your blog about all the food. I suspect the answer to the most memorable person you met is probably Angel. Is there anybody else who stands out?
No, I think Angel was really a great person to meet. And I don't know if we were just lucky or maybe we'd find other people as nice as him, but he really genuinely was interested in meeting people from other countries. He travels quite a lot himself. And so he'd used Hospitality Club himself to get information from other people when he was traveling. And he was really just keen to show us his city, keen for us to get the best out of our trip.
One warning you would give.
I would say that Valencia is probably not somewhere you want to go in August because I hear that it's very, very hot. It's not very crowded. Angel told us that if you want to find a parking space in the centre of town, there's never a problem in August. But it's because all the Valencians go to the coast because it's so hot, so sticky, it's unbearable. So that's probably not the time to visit. I'd say spring and autumn is perfect.
Okay. Now, you mentioned there were some things you didn't get to do. What would be the first or second thing on your list of things that you wish you'd had time to do in Valencia?
Well, I think I'd love to have tried more restaurants because I think there were some great ones there tucked down the back streets. And I guess if I was 20 again, which was a while ago now, I would probably be out enjoying the nightlife in the Barrio Carmen because that is the place to be. You like to be out night clubbing, bars, restaurants, cafes, and it's a perfect place and the perfect climate for it. The other thing might be I like museums, I like art galleries, that's my taste. But when you're traveling with children, you learn quite quickly that you have to limit that side of your holiday. So I couldn't do as much of that as I might have liked.
Okay. And how was your Spanish?
My Spanish is beginner Spanish, I'd say. That was actually another reason why I chose Valencia over maybe some other European destinations because my son, who's 15, is currently studying for Spanish exams. And I had learnt a bit of Spanish, attended some evening classes last autumn. So I had a bit of Spanish, but I have to admit, when you're with a local, you do get a bit lazy. So maybe I didn't practice it as much as I could have.
And as we start to wind this down, what do you wish you had known before you'd gone there?
If I'd known how many interesting things there were to see and do there, maybe I could have scheduled a bit longer to go. But as it was, we saw a lot of stuff. We saw a good amount of stuff that represented Valencia. So we had a good time, and 4 days is a good time to spend there, I think.
Well, and it seemed like a full 4 days from your blog and all the things that you did during that time period.
Yes, I'd say that it was perhaps fuller for me than it was for the rest of my family.
Okay.
Because there were times when the children had just had enough and they would either sit in the square with my husband while I popped into the cathedral to just see a few more things, or
sure.
they might be relaxing at the hotel while I was just fitting in one more museum or whatever. But I like to get a lot out of my holiday. But as I said, when you're traveling with children, that's not always the way they see it.
And is there any one moment that you thought was the most quintessential Valencia moment?
I think in terms of the historic centre, one thing I haven't mentioned, which is really wonderful and is part of Valencia's trading past, if you like, is a place called La Lonja, which is the Silk Exchange, and it's actually a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's a building which was the old trading hall from the 15th century. And it's got the most wonderful stonework, twisted stone columns and wonderful halls and rooms which have beautiful marble floors and ceilings. And that was another highlight, which is really part of Valencia's past. And the other thing, I guess, would be the beach, the port. The Spanish love to go to the beach, and the beach is right there in Valencia. You just take the bus from the centre or cycle as we did to get there, and then you're on the beach, you're relaxing, you're having your paella in the local restaurants that are right by the beach. That, I guess, would be another Valencian thing to do.
And is there one picture or one souvenir you brought back that really brings back Valencia for you?
I think those pictures of the City of Arts and Sciences, I really, really love. It's just so photogenic. It's just these amazing shapes, sculptural shapes. And I think the photos also that I took in the Fires Museum really a part of Valencia for me. We didn't go to the Fires Festival, but it's such a thing for Valencia. It only happens in Valencia. It's quite unique. The sculptures that we saw in the museum would just be our little way of experiencing that.
Do you have any last words of wisdom for us for anybody who's going to do a trip to Valencia?
Well, I think it's the sort of place that can be whatever you want it to be, because there are places to relax. You can go to the beach, you can eat great food. So if you're into that kind of holiday where you just want to have a nice time and great food and weather and just relax generally, it's great for that. But if you're the kind of person who likes to see things, likes museums, art, sculpture, it's well. And so I think it's a great place for a bit of everything, and whatever aspect you want to home in on, it can do that for you.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, especially for sharing a destination that I really hadn't thought about. So, Heather blogs again at Heather on Her Travels, heatheronhertravels.blogspot.com. But I'll also put a link in the show notes to her blog. Heather, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Chris. It's been great.
I have one internet resource for you today that I haven't had a chance to try, and I'm curious to see if anybody else has tried it. But the idea is this is a resource called Tourist Remover, and I'll put a link to the show notes into where it is. And I learned about this from the Geeky Traveler blog. And the Tourist Remover, if you take 4 pictures, say, of the Eiffel Tower, but there are tourists in the way, you can stitch together multiple pictures so that when the person is on the left-hand side and then they move to the right, if you combine the two, you have a picture without the tourist. And I'm curious if anybody's tried it, so somebody give it a try and let me know. I usually just stand there long enough for the tourist to go away, but if you're a little less patient, Tourist Remover is something for you to try. The first thing to let you know is I am going on vacation, and I have decided to make it a policy. For those of you who've been listening to the show a while, you know this, that when I'm on vacation, I don't bother podcasting because I actually want to enjoy my vacation. And so I'll be taking a lot of video in both London, Liverpool, as well as in Greece here over the next couple weeks. And I'll put into the feed 2 older shows because I'll miss 2 weeks in a row that will hopefully satiate your desire for travel news, or you could just skip them. They will be older shows, so if you don't want to listen to the reruns, that's fine too. But I'm planning on having out a new show on June 7th. So stay tuned for that, and you might just consider subscribing so you don't have to worry about when I come back. As I have time, I am planning on doing some trip blogging about this, and that would show up on tripinator.com, not on amateurtraveler.com. I try and leave Amateur Traveler these days just for the shows, so check that out on tripinator.com. I got some great comments on the episode of Iran by Bike. Similar to my reaction, a lot of people seem to love that episode. I did hear from a family that is about to do a bike trip. They're planning it to go from Alaska to Argentina, and I'll put a link in the show notes to their blog, which is familybikes.org. I also heard from someone who is from Iran who said this: "Thank you for your report on Iran. I am an Iranian student who study here in the United States. I personally believe that Iran is among the best country for tourists to visit there. Iran is an ancient country with a cultural background of more than 7,000 years, with many ancient places that you can visit them. As you mentioned, everybody who arrives in Iran gets surprised from the hospitality of Iranian people. I invite you to visit beautiful and safe Iran. Thanks." And with that, we'll bring this show to a close. Feel free to drop me an email at host@amateurtraveler.com or leave a comment on the comment line. Remember, you can find that number at amateurtraveler.com/contact, as well as many other ways to contact me. Obviously, I'll be a little more difficult to contact here for the next 2.5 weeks, but I'm looking forward to having more stories to be able to share with you, more pictures, and lots of video. As always, thanks so much for listening.